Right, we are still here with the lovely Mark Wells. I hope you've all been off checking out websites and free short stories that Mark has made available for you all. But we haven't had a chance to do that yet because we have to ask you some questions.
Shoot.
Oh, well, maybe later. Right. What is the first story you wrote that meant something to you?
Oh, gosh. Yes. I think the one that really meant something to me was the first one I got published. And so that was, it was about, almost 10 years ago now. I had I just finished working at Games Workshop. I'd been there for about 13 years, and I'd stopped working there in January. And I wasn't quite sure what to do next. And my wife, Karina, she said, why don't you do some writing? You're always telling the children's stories. Why don't you write something? And I remembered that Games Workshop had a submission window for their Black Library imprint, the Warhammer imprint. And so the submission window is April. So I had this idea for a short story, a sort of Warhammer story. So I wrote a story called The Emperor's Grace. But because I wasn't sure, I had no confidence as a writer. I still don't, but I certainly had no confidence then. And I wanted to know whether it was any good without them knowing it was me who'd written it. So I created a fictitious pen name based on the middle name of both my sons. So I created this pen name, Nicholas Alexander, and submitted a blind copy of this short story called The Emperor's Grace to Black Library. And they get, I don't know, 300 or 400, submissions in this window. And anyway, it got selected to be published. And so they sort of contacted me. And obviously then I had to let them know who I was. So which I'm not sure who was more shocked that it got published, them or me, really. And then after that, that was a bit of a, I thought, oh gosh, okay, well maybe I can write something half decent. And they commissioned me to do another short story, and then they asked me whether I'd be interested in doing a Space Wolf novel, which I collect Space Wolves. That's my sort of like chapter. Okay. And I, at that point, I'd found another job, and the job was going to take me down to Cambridge, and it was one of those jobs. I was going to be the bursar of a college, my old college, and it's one of those jobs which is like 365 days a year, 24/7 type job. And I sketched an outline for the story, but and this came back with some feedback on it, and I just thought, I'm just not going to be able to do this well. I'll either mess up the job, or I'll mess up my favourite Space Marine chapter story, my big opportunity. So I actually did a crazy thing, really, and just said, I'm really sorry, I don't think I can do this story for you. So Emperor's Grace was the first one, and that was my sort of breakthrough moment. And later on, when I finally retired, that sort of gave me the confidence to have another go at writing, which is when I got into the Cambridge Gothic stuff, really.
What a noble thing to do. I'm not sure I would have made that call in that scenario. I think I would have juggled and dropped balls, and it would have been horrible.
I don't know, man. It's if it was the Imperial Fists, maybe I would have gone back and done the story, but not for the Space Wolves.
I love it when we get people on that can talk Warhammer with Nico, because I can just sort of like smile and nod.
Just lean back in your chair. For full clarity, I am a big Black Library person. I have my entire upper right arm Gotrek and Felix tattoo. So it's always exciting. We've had a couple of Black Library alumni on.
You have. I've listened to them, and they've been just been a joy, really.
Yeah.
It seems like an incredible thing to have. So whilst you were because you were the CEO of GW for the sort of 2013 or so, was it?
Yeah, I started working there in 2000, and I think I was appointed CEO in 2007, right? And I left them in 2013.
Was that around? I have almost no history on this, so Nico might have to help me, and of course you would know it anyway. But was was it around then that the Black Library was formed? Was in the sort
No,
of...
it was a bit before that actually. It was a bit earlier, and but they I think we got a bit confused with Black Library. I think we're trying to make it into more of a sort of general publishing business. But while I was there, we sort of focused it back on the core worlds of Warhammer and 40k, and just really pushed that. And that's when we started doing the Horus Heresy series, which was their really big series. It was almost like the history of 40k, and it was a fantastic time. And we had some really great people in Black Library. I think George Mann, who's like gone on to great and wonderful things, and Nick Kime, and they've just had a fantastic editorial team. I had Lindsay Priestley, Rick Priestley's wife, was my editor for that first story, and cool. she knocked in a fairly sort of naive and sort of like patchy short story into something that was publishable, and they were just a great team.
Oh, lovely. And so were you a 40k fan before you started working there? Did you?
No, I was interviewed the other day, and I was telling myself how I got to join Games Workshop. I'd been working at Boots, and we'd had someone was leaving because Boots and Games Workshop are both based in Nottingham. So there was a leaving due for this person in town from Boots, and afterwards I was fairly drunk, but standing at a bus stop in Friar Lane, and someone very helpfully kicked in the sides of the bus stop, and it was chucking it down with rain, and I was getting soaking wet. So I went to the other side of the street to hide in the sort of the shelter of this shop to sort of stay out of the rain until the bus turned up. And it was the Games Workshop store in Friar Lane, and I saw this diorama in the window of dwarves battling Skaven in tunnels, and I thought, hey up, I better go in there this weekend because that looks great. And and I went in at the weekend and met the store manager and had a chat, and they said, oh, if you're interested, you should send an email to the chief executive, which I did, and he called me in for a curry. Well, he called me in for his office for a meeting, and then he said, do you fancy a curry tonight? And I said, okay. So we went for a curry, but he took with him 6 other people, and I thought, oh, maybe they do this every night, go for curries. And then a week later, I got an invitation to come back for another curry, and it was another group of 6 people, and I think, oh, okay, right. So they're sort of like screening me to see what I'm like, and the next day they offered me a job, and I said, what's the job? He said, we've got no idea, but we've put a desk in my office, and you can come and sit there for a year. And that's how they did it, really, in those days, which was actually not a bad way of doing it, because I think they were really trying to make sure you were someone who would fit with their culture, and that's sort of how it worked, really.
You must be an absolute force of nature in the business world, my friend. That sounds like they talent scouted you, and they kind of wined and dined you, and just they knew that they needed to have you inside the company. That's a really interesting and fun story.
Yeah, I think it's just. I mean, it is a fan business with fantastic people, and they do things their own way, and I fully embraced that. I thought I was spot on, because it's a niche, as you guys know, and to be a niche, you perhaps have to do things slightly different to sort of more sort of standard businesses, and what they realized was that they had to have people who are a good cultural fit, because it is quite a sort of unusual culture, and I think that they quite rightly made sure that they did unusual ways to find out whether you're the sort of person who would fit with that team, and I think that worked well.
Amazing. Oh well, we went down a rabbit hole there, but I'm glad.
Sorry about that.
No,
you might need to cut that out and leave it to.
No way.
No, I was saying to Nico when we first approached you that I'd seen your LinkedIn, and that I was like, Nick, he's been the CEO of Games Workshop for 30. He's worked for them and been CEO for them. So we had a bit of a nerd out over that. So it's really cool to get your perspective on it. So where would you recommend that people? So apart from The Emperor's Grace, where would you recommend that the folks listening start reading your work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think my main writing now is set in Cambridge, because when I retired, and I thought I wouldn't go back to Games Workshop and write for them again, because I think the sort of stories that they were interested in me writing, they'd obviously commissioned other people to do, and who had done a brilliant job. And I thought, no, I think I've missed that boat for now. And I thought I'd just try and improve my craft with some of my own stories. And I thought the obvious thing to do, and I don't always agree with this, but but what they said was, write about something and I put a slight variation on that. Write about something you feel. And I really feel Cambridge. I sort of was a student there, and I'd then been a fellow at the college, and I sort of got the DNA of Cambridge in my bones, really. So I thought, well, if I can write a story which is set in this, it's almost like a fantastical world in its own right, Cambridge. If I can write a story in this fantasy world of Cambridge and make it a fantasy story, it should be interesting. I mean, certainly it would scratch a lot of itches that I had, because as I said in the previous episode, when I'd been walking back from some fairly dull law lectures, I'd sort of stared up at the gargoyles and thought, oh, this would be a great place to write a fantasy story. So I just had a go at doing that. And that's the Cambridge Gothic series, and that's all really available on Amazon under my real name, which is Mark Wells, and it's a 3-book series at the moment. I wrote it as the first book, College of Shadows, was my debut novel, really, and I wasn't sure how it would go, so I got a sort of team behind me to sort of like edit it and knock it into shape, and I put it out really as a young adult fantasy mystery.
Yeah.
And
so teens and up.
Yeah, for teens and up. But if I'm honest, the majority of my audience are much older than teen, and it became an Amazon bestseller, which was exciting. And then of course the immediate question from everybody who was loving it was, when's the next one out? And I hadn't even thought what I was going to do next. I just put it out there to see if it was of any interest to people, and then I went through the sort of fairly painful process of working out what the second book would be. And the first book, College of Shadows, is set in, it's 2 freshers come up to Cambridge and discover something dark and sinister is happening in their college. The way I describe it, it's like Stranger Things meets Cambridge University. And there's a slight loose end at the end of it, which of course just means everyone's just gagging to know what then happens. And I thought, okay, right, well, the second book will be set in the next term. So we had the first term as book 1, and then book 2 will be the term after Christmas, and book 3 will be the summer term. And I sort of weaved a story arc that ran across all 3 books and wrote it as a trilogy. So yeah, and it's nice because it's allowed me to give a really good insight into what Cambridge is like, not just Freshers' Week, but all the way through the whole academic year. In fact, the closing scene really in Cambridge at the end of the 3rd book is at the end of a May ball, so you really get the full academic experience. But obviously, you get this rip-roaring fantasy story running through it, which is it's been great fun to write, really.
I think the idea of spreading an entire school year over, university year over 3 books is actually fantastic, because a lot of times, Potter being a great example, it's a school year, a book. But when you're young, a year feels so much longer.
Yeah.
So wanting to capture that, all of those things that can happen in a year, because so much can happen in a year. It's commendable that you took the time. And we did mention it in the last episode, but you write short stories as well that go alongside the trilogy.
Yeah, because I'm a very slow writer, I'm afraid. So we can talk about the writing process later. But when I finish writing, the first draft, I'm like emotionally and physically exhausted. So what I do to sort of recharge my batteries is when I send it off to the editor, I then take that window to write something that's sort of an idea that's been forming in my head during the main novel write. If I've got an idea that, that's a nice loose end, but I can't really fit it into the storyline, so let's see if I can do something about it in a short story. I'll take one of the minor characters and I'll put them through a short story hell that they can hopefully survive. And And actually, the first time I did it, I'd had this idea for sort of like a quite a creepy scene involving two students, Ying and Trevor, and I wrote this story called "Come Out to Play," which I was invited to read at the ghost story evening in college. So what happens at St John's College, where all the books are set? St John's College have over Christmas, a lot of the international students don't go back home. And they stay in college over Christmas. And to sort of keep them entertained, we sort of organise various things for them, walks to the pub and go to the barrel rolling at Grantchester on Boxing Day and that sort of stuff. But one of the things we do in the week before Christmas is we have a really creepy ghost story evening, and we read some classic M.R. James or whatever ghost stories in this room called the combination room, which is it's where the fellows have it's a room that the fellows use for their lunches, and it's got this very, very long table. It's in the first floor of a very old court. It's a very long room, and it's only candlelit. And so in the week before Christmas, we get the students in there at about 8 o'clock in the evening, and they come in and we have some mulled wine, and we've got about 110 seats set up in there, and there's a little dais between the two roaring fires, and 5 people read a ghost story, and I was asked to read "Come Out to Play" in that environment, and ever since then I've been asked to. Yeah, it was great, and it went down well, and I've been invited back every year to read a ghost story since. So a lot of those ghost stories actually have ended up in the short story collection, which you can download for free from the website. And those ghost stories, I write a bit, I've done it as a collection of short stories, and in between each story, I will give a little bit of background as to my thinking about the story, so you sort of understand the context for it. And then, you got 6 short stories there to sort of get a sense of what's going on, and most of them involve a minor character from the main books.
Cool. I mean, you're in great company.
Productive.
And you're in great company with it. The only other person I know of doing anything even like this is Ichiro Oda, who's the mangaka behind One Piece. Because he does this same thing of picking a background character. I think his excuse for doing it because he needs to figure out what he's going to do with the bloody story next. But he'll write these short issues that are, this character, do you remember them from 400 volumes ago? This is who they are. Yeah. And I mean, you're in good company. You sold over 500 million books, so I think you're on the right path.
But it's funny. I don't know what you. I mean, one of the things when I'm listening to your podcast, which is I love it. I love the format of it. The previous episode where you get 3 stories read out loud. I don't know what you think, but reading a story out loud really helps you sort of fine tune that story.
Oh
because when you speak it, you can really hear the clunky bits. You can really hear the bits that are flat. You sort of get a sense of, how difficult it would be to read as a reader from speaking it out loud. And I think actually having that event each year to sort of aim a story for has really helped my writing, because it's really allowed me to make sure it's performable. And if it's performable, it's pretty readable.
Yes. I think that's that is exactly the insight that we've found over the years that we've been doing this.
Yeah.
That it has to be in a certain shape to be able to read it, and it's pretty workable after that.
I think you can fully trip over a sentence if you're not expecting it, can't you? Yeah. And those are the ones that you realise, maybe that shouldn't be all commas. Yeah. Maybe there should be some full stops in there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So other than reading out, what is your editing process?
Oh gosh, tortuous. So I think I think the first thing I've started doing is I'm speaking to you from my attic room. I've got one of my investments as a writer was to get a big whiteboard. It's like screwed into the wall, and what I do is my first draft, I try and plot out my sort of hero's journey. I follow a hero's journey with my books basically, and so I sort of plot out the 7 beats of a hero's journey on the wall, and I sort of try and work out roughly what's happening in the story. I'm not a detailed planner, but I'm not a pantser, so I do have an overall plan for the book. And once I've got the whiteboard sorted, I then I then start writing, those elements, and I try and write it. I try and write, I don't know, 1,000 to 2,000 words a day, roughly. I mean, I don't have a strict word count, but I basically will do. I'll try and get a reasonable amount written each day, and then that evening we've got a chair down in the kitchen, and while Karina's preparing the evening meal, I'll read her what I've written that day. And I sort of sit in the store in the corner and read it. And a bit like we were saying a few minutes ago, it gives me a chance to hear how it's sounding. And
Yep.
Karina's great because she's not a big reader, but she loves listening to the stories. And therefore, if she doesn't think it's working, she'll tell me, and which can be a bit uncomfortable, but is really necessary. And and what I do is I try not to then fiddle around with it. I just try and make a note of some of the comments she's made. I might have a highlighter or whatever, and just highlight it in the text. And then the next day I'll basically start the next chapter or the next part of the chapter, and just keep writing. And that's sort of like write a bit, read a bit, keep writing, means that I get the first draft done, and then I'll go back and look at the notes that the feedback I've had from Karina, and I'll just make those what I think are reasonable changes based on her feedback, and then I'll put it through Grammarly and smarten it up and procrastinate and hum and ha, and then she'll slap me around the head and said, right, send it to the editor. So I've got a great editor, Philippa Donovan, who I came across when I first started writing, and Philippa, I think she's now based in Italy, and I send the first draft off to her, and she's great. She does a structural edit and sort of gets the shape right, and fortunately she's not been having to do as much as she did with the first books, but she's still, I need that sort of like that security blanket. And while she's doing that, I write my short story, and then when I finish my short story, she's normally got the edits back to me, and I do the second draft. And the second draft, I'll go through what things she think I need to fix, make sure I've understood it, and I pretty much take on board everything she says. So my first draft is normally 120,000 words, maybe 115, 120, and by the time I've done the edits, it's down to 100 or less. Probably I think the first one was still about 105,000 words. The second one I was getting slightly tighter in my writing. It was about 90 something, and the third one was 80 something. So yeah, she's definitely sort of knocked me into shape. But then the second draft is done, and I send it off to a copy editor. And then when I get that back, I've got an advanced reader team, which I picked up. I call them the Gothic Scholars. So they're people who've subscribed to my my website and have got the free stories. And then the ones who engage with me a lot and talk about the characters and the stories and sort of follow me a lot, I offer them the opportunity to become an advanced reader, and then we have a little chat about what their interest is in being an advanced reader, and then they're on that advanced reading team. And I've got 42 advanced readers. So I send out, after the second draft has been edited, I basically will send out that second draft to my advanced readers. And I've got a complete range. I've got some who know Cambridge really well and give me the really good feedback about the authenticity of the setting stuff. I've got others who are really good at sort of structure, others that are very good on the detailed grammar. There's others who are brilliant on consistency. As you're writing a series, you want people who say, oh yeah, I thought Cummings had grey eyes, so why have you? And so that's fantastic. And then so I basically give them 2 weeks to give me the feedback, and obviously if they give me feedback later, it's not a big problem, but basically I'll take 2 weeks to write another short story and during that time they can give me their feedback, and then I'll do the third draft, which will then get sent off to a proofreader who will just polish it all up, and then it goes off to press, as it were. So that's my sort of editing process.
I think that's such a well-worked system. It sounds like you've got a really good support network around you, which is, needed, because it's such a difficult thing to get it to the end point, I think. But I love the whole thing about the ARC readers. That they actually are pulled from people that were already enjoying the work. That's a great idea. I think for you and for them, that's lovely.
Yeah, well, my proofreader actually, who I pay now, she was one of my original Gothic scholars, but she's an editor of she works at one of the colleges, and she's the editor for one of the college publications, and she decided to go freelance, and I was one of her first customers because I just said, you did such a fantastic job as one of my ARC readers. I'd be very happy for you to formally proofread the book. And so she stepped up to be my proofreader, and she's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So, there's some real talent you can uncover, and I'm lucky, I live in the city where there's a lot of very, literate people who, generally speaking, the books are pretty well edited by the time they go to print.
Oh, I love to hear it. But I want to transport you to a beach, probably like some sort of rocky, sort of almost like shaly beach. It's cold, it's dark. You haven't got your phone, you've lost your watch, and you're starting to feel a little bit scared when a light appears above you in the sky. There's that odd sort of sci-fi whirring noise as the UFO descends, and then you are beamed up, carried up into the air, and you alight inside an alien space shuttle. Before you is a small green fellow, and he speaks.
Hello.
Hello.
You seem uncomfortable. Are you not familiar with aliens? First time?
I'm just a bit worried about that probe you're holding.
Oh, this old thing? I take it everywhere. Now, this probe, unlubed, I will add, is for you, unless you can offer me a book that I could read to better understand you. And I mean you specifically, Mark Wells, human.
A book.
Oh, I got one of the ones that doesn't know English.
Okay, so a book that describes me.
Or rather, like, just anything that would help him understand you to avoid this unlubed probe. It used to be lubed in this scenario, so I don't know.
I'm on a budget. Space fuel is very expensive.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's, in terms of my life, and the sort of, because I'm a big believer that you're formed by your experiences. There's one book that really spoke to me a lot, and the character in it, I really, he's probably my favorite character in fiction, and he's going to be very familiar to one of you because I listened to one of your podcasts a few weeks ago, and I couldn't believe that he's one of your favorite characters, and that's Sam Vimes. And
both of us.
Yeah.
And the reason he really speaks to me is that over my life, I've ended up being very similar to him. I'm not the veterinary character from Discworld. I never really, although I was chief executive of Games Workshop, I've never really felt myself as being the sort of the top guy. I've always felt like, give me a really shit job to do and I'll smash it for you. I ended up being a troubleshooter, in my career in business, simply because it was a bit like Carry On Up the Khyber. Whenever they asked for volunteers, everyone else stepped back and I was a bit slow off the mark. And I ended up getting the really tough assignments, and very much a sort of sink or swim experience. And I found I was really good at it. I found that actually, the worse it got, the better I was. And that's what I like about Sam Grimes, in the Night Watch in particular. I think I just love the Night Watch. That's definitely on my desert island with me, because it's so much about being in a really dark situation, quite literally, Night Watch, but in a really dark situation with a bunch of people who are all over the shop, quite literally, they're definitely not your elite anyway. And that's often the case when, a ragtag bunch of people who, for good or ill, are in there with you. And your job is basically, and it's always the way whenever I was in business, if something's gone wrong, 9 times out of 10, it's because the team didn't know what they were supposed to be doing, or needed focusing, or hadn't understood what the real problem was, or whatever. And what I'm really good at doing is like pulling that had this very simple mantra, which was grip self, grip team, grip task. And the grip self was making sure I was, I had a control of myself, and I was confident, and I could sort of like, not be phased by just how bad it was. And then grip team was, finding out who was with me and making sure everybody was clear about what they needed to do. And core to that is always values. Start with your values. Make sure everyone's clear about why you're there and why you are the team that has to do it. And then the third thing, only when you've got grip self and grip team, then do you grip the task. And that's about, okay, so what's the problem? And that's what Sam Vimes does. It's as a management textbook, I think it's one of the best management textbooks out there. The Night Watch, I absolutely love it. And what I love about it is that he takes no credit for it, really. I mean, it's all about the team, and he's quite emotional at the end. It's one of the books that I did actually cry at the end, because it really spoke to me, and I just love him as a character. I think Terry Pratchett absolutely smashed it with the Sam Vimes character, and he just really speaks to me because he does it. He does it for the team, and the team in the end do it for him, and I just love that. So I think that would be it, really.
Which Vimes book was it? Sorry, I think I missed the actual title.
Night Watch.
Oh, as in
Night
actually
Watch.
Night Watch, right?
Yeah.
No, I fucking love Night Watch. It's great.
I have in my notes already from the two podcast humans. All it says is truth, justice, reasonably priced love, and a hard-boiled egg. These are principles to live by for humans.
Absolutely. Hard-boiled egg, can't do without them. So,
what a great answer, and very well received here. Even today, Nico and I off mic were talking about Pratchett. I sent him a picture of the afterword of I think it was a slip of the keyboard, and it mentions that he was awarded a knighthood for services to literature in 2009. Although he always wryly maintained that his greatest service to literature was to avoid writing any. And that pretty much nails it, I think. He was a man writing very real world stuff in a fantastical setting. Really admirable.
I've put the Alien back in the cupboard just because when it comes to Vimes, it's that I don't think there are any other literary characters that quite hit the mark for me like Vimes does. No. There are plenty of characters sort of around him in the Discworld and in other parts of the Discworld that are these brilliant little character studies, but looking at things like perceived masculinity and struggling with anger and responsibility and feeling like a class traitor, and all of these things are told so beautifully in the story of Sam Vimes. It's and Carcer from Night Watch is one of the most frightening villains in any book I've ever read.
Totally agree.
I think part of that potentially comes from the fact that Vimes is such a good character, so well realised by the point of Night Watch, that Carcer as the dark mirror image of him
as the foil,
is very scary.
Agreed. I think there is just so much. There's so many layers to the characters, isn't there? And it's just, I think he's a genius as a writer about conveying so much with just a few words. And but I think one of the things that I feel I scored big when I met Karina, and for some unbelievable reason she chose to actually spend the rest of her life with me. And it's a bit like that with Vimes. He's married someone way above his level, sort of thing, but she adores him, and actually he's like, he feels in many ways like a bit inadequate, but he's not going to change. And it's a bit like me and Karina. So in many ways I just feel like I can completely understand that that it's one of those characters that in so many ways I completely relate to. So when you ask me that question, who best describes me, I think it's actually Sam Vimes in the Night Watch.
I was recently looking up Discworld quotes about love and romance, and a lot of them do lead back to Lady Sybil and to Sam. And there's a line that I was just sat in the passenger seat of the car reading them because I was making notes in case I wanted to put anything in wedding speeches, and it was and she's talking about Sybil's inner monologue on Sam, and he wasn't a gentleman, but he was a gentleman.
Yeah.
And that's what a way to be.
Yeah, great, eh?
So the other aspect of the character is, of course, his substance abuse. Like he is an alcoholic, reformed after Guards.
He wasn't an alcoholic. You have to have money to be an alcoholic. He was a drunk.
There you go. But the character deals with alcoholism. So I was just wondering, has that had anything? Is there any relation there? Have you ever had any struggles like that?
I definitely have an addictive personality. Fortunately, I've never been able to hold my drink, so therefore I've never really got into that.
Cheap date.
And I've never sort of taken up smoking, but I am an addictive person, and
but Warhammer.
And so yeah, it can be. I mean, it was one of those things where, whenever I used to try and visit stores every week, although I'd spend like 2 or 3 days in the office or 4 days in the office, I'd visit stores every week, and we used to have chicken sheds. We just keep chickens. And if I go into a store and someone was doing some great stuff, I couldn't leave without buying something. That OCD sort of kicked in, and I used to come home, and it was a bit like the dwarves going to see Bjorn in the forest. So I would basically hide the box of miniatures under the chicken coop. I'd actually stick it underneath the straw, and then what would happen is I'd take the box apart and I'd bring the sprues in one at a time. So that Karina never really noticed, because she wasn't really into Warhammer, so she wouldn't really notice that the sprues were gradually changing on the hobby desk. So that was my addictive personality, and I got bags under my eyes from painting too late into the night, I think.
Oh well, I feel like you've absolutely nailed it there with Sam Vimes. Then that's definitely. Did you reform from that? How did you reform from that?
No, I won't put the camera on so you can't see the room, but I've got a lot of cupboards in my room and they're full of miniatures. And I've got, obviously, a bit like a lot of people have a TBR pile, I've also got a TBP pile, which is a to be painted pile. So I've got, but that's one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, but we talk about reading. I'm a massive audiobook listener. I probably listen to, I don't know, at least 30 audiobooks a year, possibly more, because I do a lot of painting my miniatures, and when I'm sitting there painting, I just listen to audiobooks all the time, and I made sure that all my books, if any of your listeners are sort of audiobook listeners, then Cambridge Gothic, they're all on Audible, because I really love that format.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite. We were talking the other day about the relationship between an audiobook narrator and the actual text itself.
Yeah.
Because it's really important.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Not to throw anybody under the bus or anything, but there are some of my favorite books that the audiobook versions of them are completely unlistenable.
Yeah, totally agree.
It's just the person reading them has just not understood the task or not connected with the world properly. And then you have other people where they've just absolutely nailed it. Like,
I know.
I would say Stephen Pacey for the Joe Abercrombie books was just he defined it for me. Roy Dotrice for the Game of Thrones books. Apart from when he's doing women's voices, he's this very sort of old man's voice, and it's a bit disquieting when he starts talking about intense erotic scenes from the point of view of a woman.
I found that with Stephen Fry's reading of the Harry Potter stuff.
Yeah,
he's got a wonderful narration voice, but all of the characters sound like Stephen Fry.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
So 11-year-old Hermione Granger sounding like a mid-50s wonderful queer man is very odd.
Well, one of the things I found with so an anecdote about my experience with audiobooks. When I did College of Shadows, I thought I must turn it into an audiobook, and I went out there and I found a really lovely chap who narrated it. He had a lovely voice, but he was struggling a bit with the production side. He was a one-man band, and we published it and got a bit of negative feedback about production quality. So when I finished book 2, Gate of Shadows, I had a decision. Did I go back to the same narrator? And I've got this thing about, you can't switch narrators in a series. So I decided, okay, I wasn't going to go back to the same narrator, and I went to a production company called Chatterbox Audio, who are a lovely little niche audio production company in the West Country, and do fantastic audiobooks. So I contacted them, and they helped me select another narrator called Kieran Sword, which is a great name. It's spelled Saward. So Kieran Sword, it's pronounced Sword. He and I got on really well, and he loved the book. So I got Kieran to redo the first book, College of Shadows. Then he did Gate of Shadows, and he's just done Legacy of Shadows. And he's absolutely smashed the accents, because I've got a lot of accents. Cambridge being where it is, it's a multicultural, sort of multi-regional hot pot. The university, you do get a lot of accents in the different sort of characters and stories. So I needed someone who had the ability to do those. And gosh, what a difference if you've got somebody who can do accents. Because nothing puts me off a book more than when someone says they're from, I don't know, they're from Memphis and they sound like they're from uptown New York, sort of thing. It just really doesn't work for me. And
they're asking for their coffee.
Yeah. And Kieran, he just does a great job. In fact, funny enough, he contacted me a couple of weeks ago, and he's doing something up in Cambridge in a few weeks' time. He's based in London, and he called me and said, "Do you fancy going for a beer?" So he and I are going for a beer in a few weeks' time. So if you guys are around, you're welcome to come and join us.
Oh, very, very well, might take you up on that. I've just had this brainwave, because Nico and I were discussing this the other day, and I don't want to turn this into the Terry Pratchett discussion podcast again. But the character Captain Carrot.
Yes.
Where do you think his accent should be? Because we realise that there's no actual background detail on where he is from. We know he's raised by dwarves, but we don't know from where.
Yeah, they never say where the mine is.
So I think you were saying that he's Welsh for you. Is that right?
Yes, but because of Stephen Briggs.
Yeah.
Stephen Briggs, yes.
Yeah. It's funny because I've heard two different, because obviously they didn't have the same narrator all the way through, did they? The Terry Pratchett series. So I've heard different versions of him, and I'm Stephen Briggs works for me now. That's how I see it. That's how I hear him. But there's others I've heard, and they just don't work. Again, perhaps because I'm used to a certain voice, and but I don't know. I quite like him as a character. I think he's great. And I think it's one of those. Like you say, it really puts you off if you get it wrong, don't you think? And
I mean, it would be impossible to throw any shade on this particular man, so I'm going to do it. But John Corshaw read the recent releases of the Vimes books.
Yeah.
And it's a bit odd the way that he chose to characterize some of the characters.
Yeah.
When we've had years and probably decades at this point of Stephen Briggs.
Yeah.
Nailing it, and then obviously for the abridged versions, you had Tony Robinson in the early days. Difficult, big shoes to fill. Stephen Briggs, what a performer!
Yeah, I can't listen to abridged versions. I'm afraid I have to listen to the whole lot, and so I haven't really listened to the Tony Robinson ones. I bet he's very good, but I've really always gone for the end to end.
I wanted to listen to Going Postal not long ago, and I didn't realise that it was an abridged version I downloaded. I got my phone, I was like, 4 hours?
Yeah, how did they do that?
The book is not 4 hours. How fast is he reading?
Well, at the moment, I decided, because I think Robert Galbraith's, the new Robert Galbraith book's coming out soon, so I thought I'd better read Troubled Blood, which I hadn't read yet. And I hadn't realised how long it was. It's 31 hours or something, so that's sort of like a Game of Thrones type, length. And I'm loving it. It's great, but boy, that is you psychologically psych yourself up for a 30-hour read or listen, as it were. A lot of miniatures get painted.
Yeah. If you're up for that kind of length of book, Parado Street Station is very good. China Mill.
Oh yeah.
The audiobook for that is bombastically read. It's very, very engaging. Anyway, we should move on.
Yes.
I feel like we've kind of covered other authors that inspire you, but would you like to name check any of them in particular, or?
Yeah, I've got three I sort of rotate. Obviously, Terry Pratchett. I've been I was very late to Terry Pratchett, so I think the last one was I'm almost at the end of that main series now. I think I Shall Wear Midnight, which is one of the later books.
Oh yeah.
So I think that was the last one I've read, and I've got Snuff still to come and a couple of others. But so Terry Pratchett, I do that every sort of like third or fourth book. I'll do a Terry Pratchett. Normally if I'm writing Giles in my main series, I like Terry Pratchett because Giles has got a nice sense of humour, and I need that humour from Terry Pratchett to sort of inspire me. For the chilling stuff, I tend to read Stephen King, and I just like Stephen King. I think he's got really. I read his book on how to write, or Stephen King on writing, which was quite helpful. But I just like his writing style. He always gets me by the jugular every time, and I love his short stories. Funnily enough, it's his short stories that have tended to get made into films, or good films anyway. And then the other series I've really enjoyed is the urban fantasy series Ben Aronovich, The Rivers of London. And and they are really good. I love those. And what I like about them is that they're set in a very distinctive setting. London is the Metropolitan Police in London, and that sort of works for me in terms of inspiring me a bit with, my characters set in a Cambridge college. There's that sort of you learn a lot about the Metropolitan Police Force and how they operate in London with reading Ben Aronovich, and it's the same hopefully with people reading the Cambridge Gothic stuff from me. So I quite like those. Those are three. I find those three authors, I rotate, every now and again I'll pick up one of their books again just to make sure I've sort of got that sort of like that spine to my reading, as it were.
So we obviously filling a lot of time with audiobooks. If they're 31 hours a pop, you're not going to be listening to much else. But have you ever associated a song or a specific piece of music with one of your characters? Like, has Giles got a theme song?
Oh gosh! When you asked me that question, or you sent me the questions, and I looked at that, I thought, you know what? I think I was trying to think it through. I mean, I personally, there's certain film scores, for example, where you immediately think of the character. So, for example, I don't know, Raiders for Indiana Jones, or the theme from the Shire. I always think of hobbits, from Lord of the Rings, or obviously the classic one, of course, is the drum beat in Jaws, isn't it? You always think of the shark. So I was thinking, do I have one of those songs that I immediately think of one of my characters? And I think the one for me, Giles is this irrepressible. He's like the character. He's fairly well to do in the sense that he's been to a private school, boarding school, because he doesn't get on. His parents. He was an accident, and therefore his parents shoved him off in a boarding school so he wouldn't get in the way of their career. So he's had to sort of like learn to survive by his wits, really, in a boarding school sort of thing. And he's come down to Cambridge. And he's obviously very clever, but he just, being a little bit naive, certainly around girls, he keeps on getting knocked flat. His relationships always end up in a disaster, and he tends to sort of like with the best of intentions end up getting himself in all sorts of trouble. So for me, I think Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba, he gets knocked down and he gets up again, and he's not so he's not afraid of getting a drink or two. So I think that's the one. Whenever I hear that, I just immediately think of Giles, and I just think, yeah, poor old Giles. He's going to spend his life getting knocked down, but one thing you can guarantee is he will get up again. And I think
that might be the best answer we've had to this question.
Really, really fun answer. I like that.
So, yeah. If you'd asked me to name what song you were going to pick for £1 million, I think I would have had no chance of landing on Tub Thumping. And I'm so glad that was what you said.
So, yeah.
I always feel that question in particular is one that it's impossible to predict, because music is so disparate for the most part from the writing process that it is weird that those two things do connect for some people and sometimes. And I love it. I love that weirdness. It's a fantastic thing.
Just while we've got that door a little bit open on it, I obviously experienced this the other way, because I write songs, and I have songs that are sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally. Like the book I'm reading at the time might leak in, or especially with Ben and I do a lot of tabletop role play, and there are bits of music that are directly influenced by roleplay characters that we've been doing a lot of stuff with at that time.
I'm sure.
I just had an album come out where one of them, the band said, can we take the lyric off this? It was the intro track. So can we take the vocal off? Because we don't really know what you're talking about. And it wasn't until quite recently I realised, I was working through something going on in roleplay. So I'll do it for you at the table one day, Ben.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
But I mean, music definitely affects your mood, doesn't it? Well, it's like when I'm listening to an audiobook, certain audiobooks definitely affect my mood. I was saying earlier, for certain types of scene, it's helpful for me to have read Stephen King because he really gets that sort of like the hairs rise on the back of my neck type moment. And if I'm trying to get that, I mean, listening to a bit of Stephen King definitely helps. And equally, I like the, if I've got a sort of like a bit of a sort of like comedic scene where it's all going horribly wrong, I think Terry Pratchett is brilliant. So yeah, I think whether it's music or stories, they definitely affect your mood.
Yeah, and it's. I sometimes find that I can't write with music, and then sometimes that I sort of need to.
Yeah.
I don't know. Haven't really found what the mysterious ingredient that dictates that actually is yet.
No. Different fuels for different fires, man.
Yeah, potentially. And then sometimes I quite like to listen to things that are completely different from the story that I'm writing. Like the other day, I was writing a cyberpunk story for an episode that will have come out by the time that this comes out, and I was listening to REM.
Oh yeah.
I could kind of see that like Everybody Hurts as like a cyberpunk city whips past the Akira bike that you're riding.
It's so slow, isn't it? REM's very slow. I mean, I love REM, but it's not sort of like techno beats and.
Oh, tell me you wouldn't like in a cyberpunk movie, and they're like super slow mo. We're watching a guy's cybernetic arm get ripped out as Everybody Hurts plays. I think that would be great.
That's great.
So yeah, go ahead, Nico.
I was going to ask the same thing. I think Ben was going to ask because we're reading it from a list of questions. What themes do you find particularly appealing when you're choosing what you're going to read, or in fact listen to?
Yeah, it's funny. I think because I've not studied writing, I've just sort of done it. I'm a bit slow on the uptake with what some of these themes are that the sort of tropes and so forth. And TikTok's been really interesting for me because a lot of people claim to like certain tropes with their their personal profiles on TikTok, and I'm looking at them thinking, what do they mean by that? I was trying to work out what some of these things are, but I think the things that I really like in a story is I really like heroes who dig deep. I like that. That's something that I quite like. A bit from my sort of like personal experience in life. I like when you're thrown in at the deep end and it's tough. If you can pull yourself out of that, I think there's something special about that in a story. Yeah. So I like that, and I also. I like people who stand up to bullies. There's something about I really love a character who could bend or could run away or whatever, but doesn't. And I love the characters who, even if it lands them in all sorts of trouble, who actually fundamentally will try and do the right thing no matter the odds. And that's something I really like. So those are good. And I also love it when a story takes you somewhere you didn't expect. I do like twists. It's great when somebody does something in a story which I didn't see coming, and I think, oh, great. I love that about this Game of Thrones stuff. There was really, it was one of those things where it's nice to be, to be surprised when you're reading and to have that moment of thinking, oh, genius, brilliant, didn't see that coming, wow. And then you sort of think back and think, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I remember that. We were talking about earlier in the previous episode on some of the stories you'd written, and oh yeah, I just see now that punchline's come through, I've realised what you were like, the teasers you were doing earlier, and I think I really like that in a story when they've been leading you along and then they do get you, and oh yeah, good, that was good.
Especially when it leaves you with that hollow feeling like you've actually suffered grief. You're going through grief for something that just happened.
Loss. Yeah,
it's loss. It is loss because you've spent so long connecting with the character in your head. So on the flip side of that, are there any tropes that you actively avoid in your own writing?
Yeah, I'm going to upset a lot of people here. I'm just not into superheroes. I don't like the superhero. I don't like it when people have superpowers. What I like is that they earn their strengths.
Yeah.
So there's a book that I really loved, and in fact, I read all the books in the series, but Arlen in The Painted Man, who's this Peter V. Brett, his series, The Painted Man series. This is a character who's a young lad who goes off and they basically, the magic system is one where you have to basically tattoo yourself with wards, and the wards give you certain strengths. But to get to that point, you have got to go through hell, really, to sort of to work out how to use these wards to sort of fight off the demons. And I really like the fact that they're not God-given, or you're not born with particular strengths. You have to earn them. So, for example, I don't. We talked about Warhammer earlier on. You have Space Marines, which are these genetically engineered sort of like superhuman warriors. I'm not as excited by a Space Marine book as I am by an Imperial Guard book, where you've got grunts on the ground who are up against these horrific alien monsters. I'm rooting for the Imperial Guard characters much more than I am for the superhuman Space Marines. And I quite like, I'm not a big fan of superhero movies and superhero books, really, so I don't really opt for those. And then another one I'm not really very keen on is when the protagonist, the evil character, is pure evil. I quite like all the villains to be, you understand why they have become evil, or why they've turned, or whatever. I quite like it when you've got somebody who's you can sort of understand how they ended up being the way they were. And even though they're completely reprehensible and it's just horrible what they do, I quite like the fact that they're not necessarily redeemable, but I quite like the fact that actually you can sort of see how a human could get to that point. And
you want them to be people.
Yeah. So I think it comes down to it. At the end of the day, I like people, and I don't particularly like superhuman or equally super evil people. I think there's something about the evil people must have, in a sense, some trace of humanity still in them, and the superheroes for me have had too much of their humanity removed.
I think that's a really, really good insight. It's almost preferring people to archetypes as well, isn't it? Potentially, like this.
Yeah.
So often get flattened out a bit when they become oddly powerful or capable of overcoming any situation. It's sort of like, well, I've just lost my ability to connect with you in any meaningful way.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Well, there's a series that I read. My father and I were big sailors. So, my father was a big sailor, and being, going on holiday with him, basically, I was the crew, and we used to sail a lot together. And he got me into the Patrick O'Brian series. That's the Master and Commander series. You might have seen the film, and the novels are absolutely sensational, absolutely fantastic, brilliant writer. And obviously, if you're into Napoleonic warfare, sort of like naval warfare, obviously they're fantastic, because everyone reckons they are the most well-researched, authentic versions of naval warfare. But what's brilliant about them is the relationships between the key characters on the ship, and he is just a genius at that. And what's so lovely about it is there are no tropes whatsoever. It's one of those things where you're learning as much by book 23. You're learning as much about the characters as you were in book 1. That they're not stereotypes. They are really, they're evolving, they're changing. They're, the things that are happening in the books are affecting them, and that is an amazing writer who, sadly he died partway through his last book, so he doesn't actually finish the series. And I was toying with the fact whether I wanted to read it or not, and in the end I did. And I was just so into the story, and then suddenly it gets to this point. In fact, I think the moment it actually got to that point, I was listening to it on audiobook, and the narrator just stops, like sort of mid-chapter, and just says, "And that is it. He wrote no more." And I think I was driving somewhere at the time, and I had to pull over to the side of the road, and I sat on the side of the road, and I just sat there crying.
I'd be steaming.
It was so I just felt like I'd personally lost, my friends. It was an amazing, and that was like in a book. I can't remember how many books it was, 23 or something at that point, but completely into the character. So I think once somebody becomes, that's why I'm nervous about things like Jack Reacher and so forth, which is, I'm really enjoying the early books, but I'm worried that if I keep reading Jack Reacher, it'll just become the same. And that's what worries me a little bit about these series that have just one main character, and he sort of becomes almost a caricature of himself.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to hear about a time when it's done elegantly as well. Because there are a lot of books that think, oh, we need to make sure all these characters are unique. It's like, yeah, there's Hairy Joe, and he really hates cuttlefish. So every time anything happens, Hairy Joe has to lean in and go, oh, and I bet those bloody cuttlefish. In a scheme to steal money from the post office, Joe. Really? Come on, man.
But as a self-published author, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but as a self-published author, I'm thinking very hard, because obviously I know that if you write a series, then you do get a terrifically loyal following, and they want to find out more. And I worry about writing a long series, because I'm not sure I'm creative enough to keep it interesting. So one of the nice things about Cambridge Gothic, which was an accident, and it was just because I was so naive as a debut author, is I've got multiple points of view in the plot. Basically, I've got 4 main characters, so you keep on seeing different parts of what's going on from different points of view, and that means I've got basically 4 main characters to play with as I'm writing. Whereas I think if I only had one character, then I think I would struggle a little bit to keep that character interesting if I was writing, a long series. So I'm hoping I can actually keep the Cambridge Gothic characters fresh by having the different points of view, and you learn more about those individuals over a series of books rather than just the one individual.
So I think following on from that rather beautifully, and we did also touch on this in the first episode, in the story episode, but what is your next project?
Yeah, so I thought I'd have a go at first person. The first 3 books are written in the third person, and as I said, it's very much sort of a misfit group tackling these like hideous problems together. So, like I said, the Stranger Things meets Cambridge University sort of style. I thought with the next book, I'd have a go at taking one of those characters and write a first person book with his perspective, and this is a fairly colourful character, Giles, and everybody loves Giles. All my sort of fans' sort of feedback is, everybody loves Giles, and I thought, well, let me see if I can try and get inside Giles's head and write it. So I've got I think it might be a 3-book trilogy again with Giles, and just explore him and put him through hell and see what I find out about him. And he's one of those characters where he's always surprised me as I'm writing. I mentioned earlier that I try and plot out my books, but he's just one of those characters who just rides roughshod through my plans. He just does things in when I'm writing him that I hadn't planned him to do, and I'm very much a believer if you end up doing that, don't rewrite it. Go with the chaos he's created, and because it's for him, and it's for him and me in the plot almost to sort of solve that problem, as opposed to trying to edit it into a different place. I'd much rather go with the flow of the story and deal with the problem he's created for me than try and fix him.
Oh, I've just thoroughly enjoyed your outlook on the way that you create and also take in stories. It feels sort of very structured, but also there's plenty of room in it for sort of, as you just said, the chaos, and also to be influenced and inspired in different ways. It's really lovely. I can see exactly how you ended up on a bestseller list here. I think you can see it in the DNA of your writing. It's very, very cool. Where should people go to keep up to date with future projects, but also to read about your previous publications and this kind of thing?
Well, so I've got I do a monthly newsletter. So if you go to my website, marknwells.com, and you hit the subscribe button. I'll send you the short stories. You get those free, and you can have a look at those, and you can find out a little bit about the world that I'm writing in through those, but also a little bit about what I'm trying to do, because obviously as I try and write between the short stories a little introduction to each one, so you can see where my weird head is getting to, and then you'll get a newsletter every month with either what I'm doing on the writing, a bit about Cambridge, which I think people are normally quite interested in, and also a bit about sort of the current project I'm working on, without giving any spoilers away. So the newsletter is a good place to start, on the website. The other thing on the website, if you do decide to read the books or even the short stories, I do have a maps section, because I don't know about you, but I love maps in books, and I have a maps section on my website, and if you go on that tab, there's a beautiful three-dimensional illustrated map of St John's College, where most of the action takes place. And there's also a beautiful illustrated map of the river, where some of the action takes place. And I've also, when I was working as a bursar at the college, I commissioned Google Maps to come in and do a street view of the college, taking you into some of the bits you don't get to see, like the old library and the chapel. And you can actually walk through the college like one of the characters on that, because you can basically go on the street view version of it, and you can walk through First Court, so that if you listen to the previous episode, you've got Giles walking through First Court into Second Court towards O's Staircase, Second Court, and actually you can actually do that live through Street View if you're interested in doing that. So the website, I think, is good fun. And then in terms of the books, I'd just go to Amazon, or if you're into Audible, and just look me up, Mark Wells and Cambridge Gothic, and you'll see the three books. It's College of Shadows, Gate of Shadows, and Legacy of Shadows, and that takes you through the first, second, and third term of the first year.
Fantastic stuff. Right, all of you get on Google Maps, have a walk around the college, and you know what? Go to Cambridge, visit Cambridge. It's beautiful, and if you don't like the first pub you go in, there's another 3 million, so you're gonna have a good night out.
Yeah,
Mark,
good.
You have been wonderful company. Seriously.
Thank you. That's good. Well, like I said, I'm very happy to meet up if you ever fancy going for one of those many beers in Cambridge. Mm-hmm. And actually, my readers, I also say to my readers, if ever anybody reads the books and would like to meet up, then, and they're coming to Cambridge, then I meet everyone who comes up here who's read the books. I'll meet them for a coffee, and I'll take them for a tour around the college, because I have access to the college, and I can take them to the key scenes in the book if they're interested in seeing them for themselves personally.
3 stories, coffee, and a tour. Guys, you don't get many authors like this. I feel like I should get on a train now. Will you still be up in a few hours? What's the plan?
Probably in the morning.
Wake up.
I'll shake you awake. Mark! I need coffee, Mark! Well, yeah, it's been brilliant having you on, and thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers, Nico. Thanks, Ben. Really nice chatting to you, and thanks for the stories in the previous episode. Really enjoyed those too.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?